You found your way to the Winning Tactics podcast with host Adam Sinkus. Adam discusses winning tactics with small business owners and entrepreneurs, uncovering processes and introducing the tools and solutions for enhancing the bottom line. Thanks again for finding your way to the Winning Tactics podcast, and now your host, Adam Sinkus.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. More importantly, happy Winning Tactics Day. Excited for today's show. Before we dive into all that, don't forget to jump onto YouTube and follow us, The Winning Tactics, or you can find us at thewinningtactics.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss a show. Today's going to be a great show because we're talking about, I think, one of the most challenging parts of business leadership, and that is performance management. When it goes right, it definitely goes right, and it really helps your business, right? But when it goes wrong, oh my gosh, it can balloon into things that are crazy. So excited to have Will Schirmer on the show. Will, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and appreciate the time today. So I have spent a career in human resources about the last, 23, almost 24 years now, and kind of fell into HR, quite honestly. In my early studies, I wanted to be an engineer like my father, and I still remember taking the occupational survey back in high school that apparently indicated I should be a personnel manager. And I laughed at that and promptly went off to engineering school. And after deciding there was just a little bit too much math and science for my liking, I enjoyed those things, but didn't want to make a career out of it, made some switches, and eventually found my way into doing some postgraduate work in the UK, where I had an opportunity to take on my first HR job. And from there, I've really spent the last almost 24 years in HR, mostly corporate, did a little consultancy earlier in my career as well, and really grew to love the idea of leadership development. The crucial role that leaders have in managing the performance of the organization and helping it be successful was something that I grew to become really fascinated by. And so I had a hand in developing and implementing leadership programs for a number of organizations, both domestically and internationally. Did a little bit of writing too. I think along the way, we probably all think we have a book in us, and I've got one at least that's out there. So that's called The Leadership Core, and it really covers some of the subjects we'll talk about today, including performance management as well. At the end of the day, of course, leaders are there to gain results through the efforts primarily of others. And performance management is the heart of what leaders do. So love talking about leadership in general, performance management in particular, and so very happy to be here today.
Well, I appreciate it, and I know our audience is going to appreciate all the great tidbits that you're going to bring to the show today. I want to dive into this because I want to first define what performance management is, because I think, early on in my leadership career, I thought performance management really only meant like personnel management, and I think it's much broader than that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and kind of defining what performance management really is.
Yeah, it's really the process of putting structure and also counsel or coaching in place to improve both the consistency and the quality of other people's results. And that's really the heart of our role in leadership. It's to make sure that there's an architecture around performance, so we increase the chances that good performance is going to happen. And when it does, make good performance even better. And the whole idea is, of course, to move that bell curve around performance to the right, so the average performance continues to increase over time.
I love that you call out process, right? The process piece there, because I think oftentimes as leaders, we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants and reacting to what's coming at us at any given moment, and good, bad, or ugly. Sometimes, sometimes we get all of that all at once. But, you know, I think process is an interesting perspective to put in play here, because it talks about how we build strategies around this. And so when you're working with an organization in kind of that grounds, the ground strategies, what are some of the pieces that you think are important to put in play for performance management strategy?
Yeah, well, I think the first is an understanding of what structure is in place today within an organization, and what issues are they having as well. Because of course, in order to orient ourselves to what we have to do tomorrow to improve, we need to know where we are today. And so it's really an understanding of what's being used today, what exists, because there's probably more resources than many leaders think of, and often how well are they being used. And this is to this idea of accountability, I know that we'll talk about shortly, but there does need to be structure in place. And it's often been said that performance management or execution is built around three things: understanding, ownership, and follow-up. And so I'm looking at the types of resources in each of those areas. When we delve further into performance management, I'll outline that a bit further. But understanding really is about understanding expectations. This is about goals, responsibilities, and accountabilities. In order to be accountable, people need to know, what am I accountable for as well? And often people feel a sense of ownership. Nobody comes into the job each day saying, I'd really love to do a mediocre job, or I'd like to fail, right? With the best of intent, we want to come in and do well because it makes us feel good. Success is something that enhances our self-esteem and our sense of self-worth. So we want to be successful, but it's putting in place some architecture around that. So how do we enhance people's clarity around what's expected, their behavior, their performance, and work outcomes? And then putting an architecture around accountability as well. We'll delve into that, but there's plenty of resources that we can use to help people feel more accountable and be more accountable at work. And then the other is follow-up. How well are we following up to ensure that we got what we expected? And there's a number of benefits to good follow-up as well. So it's that three-legged stool around performance that I typically look for.
I love that you talk about setting expectations, because I think it's easy to overlook that, especially when you're really familiar with something. I go back to when I was a kid, right? And my dad would be working on something around the house and need an extra set of hands. And he knew exactly what he needed, but communicating that wasn't always the clearest. And so then you'd be holding the flashlight and pointing it at not quite the right spot. And he's like, no, 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 down here, right? And so it's because he knew where he wanted it, but he hadn't really truly given that expectation of what he needed from it. and and so that it set forth a path of frustration, I think, on both both ends of it. And we see that in the workplace too. I definitely have experienced that as a leader and as a contributor. So I love that you call that out. I think it's important. How do you approach building some of that structure of expectation into the employee, into that employee communication strategy?
Yeah, you've called out some key issues here. And the first is, most things that go wrong in organizations are around communication, whether it's change management or it's performance management or it's an employee relations issues. Most of the time it's down to communication. And when you don't get the results that you expected as a leader, we often first point to our people. And what we have to do first is look at the person in the mirror and say, okay, how did I contribute to this issue? It's an I problem first. It's not a you problem. Certainly there's mutual accountability, but we have to do that. And the first, as you mentioned, is around expectations. So there's a few things that I would suggest. One is, you can't communicate what your expectations are if they're not clear to you in the first place as a leader. So it's got to be clear in your head before you can communicate it out. Make sure that it's got firm edges rather than fuzzy edges, right?
Yep.
Execution is born from clarity, and clarity is born from simplicity. So if you want people to execute, don't make life complicated for them. Complicated, hard to understand goals and expectations are going to cause people confusion and frustration. So it's got to be simple and easy. And when it's simple and easy, it's also simpler and easier to communicate as well. So the other is around this idea of not just thinking of and making clear your expectations, but also those expectations probably have supporting metrics or goals. What are they? People want to know how the game is played and how the score is kept. So when that is clear to them as well, they're going to be more focused in their efforts. They're not going to waste time, effort, and resources trying to guess. It was like when you said, hey, I was holding the flashlight and all dad kept saying is no, wrong. No, that's wrong. Well, nobody on your team is psychic. They need guidance from you as to what exactly constitutes good performance. Once you set goals, of course, you need to make sure that those expectations and supporting metrics are clear, and ask your people to communicate them back. Tell me what your understanding of my expectations and goals are. You don't want people to get frustrated wasting time doing things because of misunderstanding. Now, other things with respect to expectations along the way are making sure, and this is part of performance management, that those expectations don't somehow get clouded over time, right? Regular communication, regular check-ins with your people, both one-on-one and in groups, and making sure that the expectations are still clear and forefront in people's minds, and that the goals are as well. You need to make sure those expectations are aligned, that the expectations of some people don't work against another, and that does happen. That's an unintended consequence at work. And that people have line of sight as well around expectations and goals. In other words, as an individual, how do my goals contribute to the team's, and how are they aligned? And how does doing well as a team contribute to the organization's goals? If we think about skilled rowing teams, I often use this analogy. They're in lockstep, perfect sync. Everyone is literally rowing in the same direction. That's what we want to communicate to our people around expectations as well. So there's a lot in that, and we want to set those expectations early with people. And we also want to occasionally scare off those people who don't want to work in an expectation-oriented, performance-oriented team. It's better to have never hired the person who wasn't aligned than to have someone come on board and now to have to manage up or out a problem because we weren't clear with expectations all along.
There's a few things that stuck out to me as you're talking there, and I love that you mentioned clear goals, right? Because I think that's you have to be able to measure success, regardless of what you're doing. You have to have some sort of measure of what does success look like, and these are oftentimes in organizations I find the goals and the KPIs that are set out, right? But if you can't clearly communicate that to your team, then nobody knows what winning really looks like, right? And at the end of the day, I think you sum it up best when you talk about the rowing team. If you can't, if not everybody knows what direction we're going, then all you're going to do is row in a circle. And so I think it's a really important call out, that you talk about goals and understanding the goals and where people are going with respects to performance management. I think it's a critical piece of it. So I want to pause for just a minute because we love our sponsors over at Ventive. They are making your business just run absolutely smooth through their groundbreaking CRM. It really helps you fill out those gaps between marketing, sales, service, operations, and eliminates data leaks. You get to improve some efficiency, streamline your business, all those great things. Super, super great tool, very, very inclusive. And we just really appreciate their support for the winning tactics. So go check them out, and we'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for you. So we've been talking a little bit about why performance management is necessary, and you mentioned accountability, right? And I think this is a big piece in that why. Talk to us a little bit about how we can hold our teams accountable, and why that's important to hold them accountable for their performance.
Yeah. So I described accountability really as the heart of performance management, understanding, ownership, and follow up. And accountability is indeed about ownership. It's having a sense of personal responsibility and ownership to the results, to my contribution to the team's results. And then I have an obligation to others, the person sitting to my left and to my right, to do a good job. Because if I do a good job where our accountabilities overlap or intersect, that's where you get good team performance. And so it is absolutely critical. So there's a number of tools, and often, frankly, these are the same tools that we use for performance management. First is certainly about setting expectations and goals. People want to know, what exactly am I accountable for? So you've got to describe clearly what their responsibilities are, what you expect out of performance and behavior, and what their work outcomes are supposed to be. As you mentioned, what does success look like? People don't want to have to guess about that. Make sure, again, that you are talking about this early. Talk about it in interviews. Talk about it in onboarding. You have to start as you mean to go on. And remember that culture is the worst performance or behavior that you'll accept. That's the best way to define team culture. And so you want to set the bar high, make sure that it's challenging but achievable. Other things you can do to increase accountability are using checklists, operating procedures, guidelines, systems. All of these things are resources, they're tools, and they help people perform, but they also help ensure that they're held accountable. If you follow a recipe, after all, there's no clear job where that's always the case, but where we put important operating procedures in place, we hold people responsible for following them, so we're assured of a more consistent outcome. So those are things. Don't forget about feedback. Feedback is the heart of what we do as leaders, and it's how we manage performance and coach. So we have to have a flow of regular feedback about performance. Now, that could be in the form of performance data that you're getting to your people, hopefully in real time or near time, so that they can adjust behavior. And also, you're having regular dialogue with your people. We owe our people regular communication around performance and behavior, and to be a tool. As leaders, we're a resource for performance. So we owe them that. And follow up. Follow up is one of the best ways to ensure accountability. If people know or sense that you're never going to follow up, they can put less than a full and fair effort into their work, because they know simply that no one cares enough to follow up and see if the job's getting done, and also see if I need help along the way. Follow up isn't just about pointing the finger to say, yes, you're doing a good job, or no, you're not. It's about leaders being engaged enough, again, to be part of the solution, to help, to coach, to uncover obstacles, and then help their people move around them. And so those are some of the things I would point to that help lead to a system of accountability and healthy accountability, where it's transparent as well. People know how each other are doing in terms of performance. That's also a way of holding people accountable. Not everybody's, by the way, comfortable with that. Right? There are some people who say, well, my performance shouldn't be visible to others. Well, as a leader, you need to decide whether that's going to be the case. But in healthy accountability cultures, people shouldn't fear their performance. People should embrace it. And if they're struggling with performance, often their colleagues have suggestions for how to make it better. This isn't just on the shoulders of the leader. The leader wants to use the tools of other people around them to enhance accountability, and also other resources, other people's expertise to help people perform better. But transparency is often a way of increasing accountability too.
You know, I love that. I remember back one of the first teams I ever led. One of the things that I did, it kind of speaks to your, feedback, right? And having that constant communication with the team. I used to walk around every day. I set a time in my calendar to walk around for about a half an hour every day and have a touch point with every person on my team, right? And it wasn't a formal touch point, right? It wasn't a formal one-on-one or, review process or anything like that. It was just hey, how is everything today? Is there anything you need help with? And like, I remember, after doing that for about 2 or 3 weeks consistently, the whole dynamic of the team changed, and it was less about, they became more focused on the goal because they saw the support level. They saw the fact that somebody was ensuring that they were successful. And so it's really interesting that you say, having those touch points frequently, is as frequently as you can, being an important piece of the performance management puzzle. So I've experienced that first place, and it definitely rings true from my experience.
Yes, people want to know, and the hard reality of leading is people see you in one of two ways. You're either a resource or an obstacle to their happiness and success at work. And when you take the time to engage, there literally is a theory about management called management by walking around, which I wish I would have thought of that, right? It's a simple idea, which is simply caring enough to check in with your people regularly, to get out of your office, because people know that they need to be accountable for their performance and behavior because you might check up. And also they feel supported because you care enough to walk around and ask, how's it going? Anything I can help with? Anything you're struggling with? They know, they feel that support because they see it every day. It's happening with the leader between they and their colleagues as well.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about accountability and why performance management is necessary, and we've started to dig into some of those strategies to make the most out of performance management. But outside of showing some of those results, what are some things I can do as a leader from a communications perspective to make performance management easier?
Yeah, I mean, most of these tools that we use, they're all communication based, really. We want to communicate uh, issues with performance and ways in which we can help our people. So we talked initially, of course, about setting expectations and goals. We also talked about accountability and all the communication around that. There are other tools we're going to use around performance management. The first is an obvious one, and that's training. We as leaders don't have to bear the burden of training all of our people personally, but we owe it to our people to at least have a plan around training. Absolutely, when they come in and on board. And oftentimes leaders fall down because they take a lot of time to hire someone and then largely neglect organized onboarding because they are too busy, so to speak. And that leaves a bad impression with new hires. So the first is a simple tool around communicating early. Obviously, yes, expectations and behaviors, how the game is played, but also giving them the practical skills in order to do the job well. And if you have a training department that you partner with, great. It's not their job to onboard your new hire, but you will get involved in trying to figure out a plan in which they may be involved in early training or ongoing training. So training is a piece. Mentoring is another big piece. Again, as a leader, what you say and how you say it may not always resonate with all your people. And that's a you responsibility, right? You might not just say, well, I told Bob 5 times and he still didn't get it, so to speak. Well, maybe it's not a Bob issue. Maybe it's how you're communicating as a leader. And so having a support network that is wider than just you, experienced others that your people can go to, particularly early on, and mentors for people that are either new or struggling helps, because they can communicate in a different way that might resonate. They have some credibility because they're doing the job, and they're going to be connecting in a way that maybe you haven't with your people. So again, using the resource of mentors and experienced people. The regular check-ins are key. We talked about regular communication, but do you have regular one-on-ones with your people? Only you will decide how regular should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
In those organizations or positions in which things change quite quickly, it could be short cycle sales jobs or recruiting. You might have to meet more often. Other roles you may not, but you need to have some regular cadence of one-on-one discussion with your people, and also regular group discussions also. Don't forget, you've also got other resources like 360-degree feedback, where not only you're giving feedback, but you're gathering periodic feedback from peers, subordinates, other internal customers, to give people feedback on their behavior and performance that can really supercharge their personal development. So that's important. And we talked about regular follow-up. Get them data as well. Make sure that they have performance data in their hands, and that you're regularly following up, not just to talk about where they're struggling, but also to give them a pat on the back and give them some recognition if they're headed in the right direction. We've all been there where we've had a boss in past that only talks to us when things go wrong, right?
Oh yeah.
We've all been there, and we dread that, right? Their phone calls go to voicemail. No one walks voluntarily into the boss's office to let them know how it's going. And there's it's called the disease of a critical heart, really. And no one likes to be in that environment where nothing they do is ever good enough. So make sure you take the time to use follow-up as a recognition and reward tool as well. So all of those things around communication, and of course there's formal processes like performance appraisals as well, or interim appraisals that we use. But all of those are opportunities to communicate and also to coach. We have to remember that leading is doing more than just setting the expectation and the goal and communicating, well, you're not hitting expectations. Well, people can see that. They don't need you for that as the leader, particularly if they're giving you performance data. What people want to know is how. How do I get there? And as a leader, that's where you come in. You need to be able to actively coach and manage through performance issues.
I like some of the things you're talking about there with the performance appraisals. I think that's something that small business owners, at least in my experience, often overlook, is having a formal performance appraisal process, right? Even if you're not doing it monthly, even if you're doing it a couple times a year, I think it's important because it gives people this it gives your employees this kind of checkup to see where they're at and what they can do to move forward. I always used those as opportunities to talk about how people can move forward in their career, right? So how can we take what you've succeeded on and build that into your next potential role within the organization, or even depending on the organization, we have to be real. Sometimes that means setting them free, right, into where the path that they really want to go in. And I think that's a hard distinction to make as a leader. But if you hold somebody back, I think there's an animosity that you can build up with that person over time as well too. So I like that call out. I also like that you talk about just making sure that as we communicate with our team, that we're clear on expectations all the time with them, because again, just that insecurity of not knowing whether you're doing something right, wrong, or indifferent is challenging as an employee, and can actually be in my experience, when I've experienced that, has been a huge demotivator in what I do. So, and then the last piece, I talk a lot. I've written a few articles on it as well about the boss versus the leader, right? And walking into the boss's office is like, it's a terrible, terrible experience. You're waiting to be yelled at. You're waiting to be told that you're not good enough. And it's like it can really shut down everything that you do as an employee. And so I think we need to also really keep that in mind. So I love that call out. I want to shift one last time. I want to talk about how when performance management goes bad, right? Because it's not all about the rah-rahs and the great things. There are times as a leader where we have to go and, put the hammer down and say, look, the expectation has been set, but you're clearly not meeting it, and we need to figure out why. And sometimes that conversation is easier than others, but what are some strategies when you need to get into that space where things aren't necessarily good, but we still need to motivate and build that person up to get to the performance that we need and expect from them?
Yeah, this is a very important subject again. And I think I have a lot of passion for, because again, I think about this in the context of team culture, where team culture, again, is the worst performance or behavior that you'll accept. So the first thing as a leader that we have to do is address it. And there are numbers of leaders out there that can't or won't address it, that for primarily one of two reasons. One is that they don't have the tools and techniques in order to do it, or two, they're unbelievably uncomfortable with the idea of having to hold accountability conversations with people, crucial conversations. And if that's the case, there are leaders that really do need to look in the mirror and assess whether leading is right for them. And it's okay. It's not for everybody. It doesn't suit everybody's working personality. And sometimes people are promoted into leadership roles because they're the best practitioner, right? They're the top performer. Well, leading and doing take two different skill sets. And so the first is you've got to address it. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you've got to get comfortable. Or again, you've got to decide whether the role is right. Now, it's never as pleasant as patting people on the back because they're doing well. But we also have to remember that feedback is given because we care. And the feedback that stings is the most useful. And we give that feedback because we care as leaders. There's a wonderful video called The Last Lecture by a gentleman named Randy Pausch. And Disney has a copy out of it. It's a fairly well-known lecture on a lot of things, including performance management, feedback, and life. And Randy said, look, the loneliest place to be is when you're underperforming and you know it and others know it and no one's saying anything to you because they've already given up. So we have to care enough to give the feedback is one, and get comfortable with that idea. So, and it takes some practice, right? So you have to think about what you're going to say, how you're going to deliver it. And remember, you need to separate the people from the problem. In other words, if one of my staff can't find the building on time every day, they're not lazy. We don't want to get personal with our comments. They have an issue with timeliness and perhaps with their ability to follow GPS in their car to get there on time, right? So we're going to talk about those behaviors. So separate the people from the problem is one. The other is that as a leader, first, you've got to look at how you may have contributed to the problem. Often it's a mix, right? Maybe you weren't clear with expectations. Maybe the individual doesn't have the training. Maybe you didn't follow up to find out whether there were obstacles to overcome. But don't assume, for one, it's all a problem of the employee, and don't assume you know the answer to the problem yet. You haven't spoken to your people yet. So when you do talk to them, remember, it's two-way dialogue. People can get a little emotional. Leaders can get angry when their people underperform, right? They take it personally. And again, no one comes in looking to underperform at work and do a bad job. So assume benign intent, that someone is coming in trying to do good work. Now, you probably have an issue that's one of two things. We either have an issue around the amount of work that needs to be done or the quality of the outcomes. So in dialogue with your people, again, get their side of the story. They may uncover problems that you weren't aware of, and find out, If this issue is around the amount of work, we have an issue one, possibly around motivation, could be, in which we need to re-engage our people, explain why doing the job is important, help people take more meaning from their job, more purpose. It could be a motivation issue. It could be a time management issue, an organization issue, though, right? That there are things getting in the way during the day of getting enough of the expected work done. So you may need to talk about that. Now, if it's not those things, if people are putting in the effort and the quantity of work just isn't producing a good output, then what you have is a coaching issue around skill, right? And I don't know if you've heard of the activity pyramid, but it's common in sales environments. For example, what we have is an issue, let's say with salespeople closing enough deals. Well, salespeople have certain numbers of calls they make. From those calls, they get contacts. From those contacts, they get appointments, let's say, and those appointments result in closed deals. So if they're doing the amount of work, what I'm looking for is, where is that process breaking down? Well, they're making the calls and getting the contacts, but they're not getting the appointments. Then I'm looking at, okay, well, what are you saying during those conversations? Let me help you. And maybe we can reframe what you're saying to get better results. So what I'm looking for is an opportunity of where along this process is quality breaking down so they're not getting the results that they need. And this is the coaching opportunity. This is the heart of what we do as leaders. People are saying, I want to do good and hit my goals. Tell me how. And so we need to find out where there's the breakdown. So come with data if you can. Come with logic. Don't assume that you've got all the answers before you have the conversation, and make it two-way. Once you believe you've narrowed this down, come up with a plan with your person and get mutual commitment. In other words, paraphrase it at the end to say, okay, I think what we've agreed is you're going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to follow up with you, and we're going to meet regularly. I'm going to provide you these resources as leader, and we'll continue to monitor this over the next 30 days. But get mutual commitment. And then lastly, it's all about follow-up, right? It's just like any other performance management issue. And so having put a plan in place, you've now got to follow up and see if it's being put in place and if you're making progress. So those are some of the tips I give around performance management. If over time you don't see an improvement, reassess. As a leader, did you deliver what you said you were going to help? If so, okay, what's going on with the individual? Again, is it an effort issue? Is it an execution issue? But over time, if you're not seeing some incremental progress, then okay, you've got to make a decision. But remember also what makes common sense. An individual who gets 90% of the way to the goal, and then you cut loose because they didn't climb the mountain all the way? Or do you give them a little more time to climb the extra 10%? Right? There's a common sense factor to leading as well. But ultimately, you have to be able to sleep at night if you part company with someone. If you can, if you've given all the resources and help, then okay, the job is just not suited for the person. If you've got a good employee, see if you can redeploy them internally. If there's other issues, it might just not be a fit in your organization.
Yeah, I love that. A couple of things, like, so when I look back at my performance management, I used to do some leadership training as well, and one of the things I always talked about was I called it the 60-40 rule in coaching conversations, right? So what I mean by that is I always tried to talk only 40% of the conversation and let the employee talk 60% of the conversation, right? And obviously the less you can talk, I think, as a leader in those conversations, the more powerful those conversations become in the performance management space. And how I always achieved that was just asking questions, right? And it goes back to what you're saying about getting down to that root cause of what is the real problem here, right? And so that always proved as a very useful strategy for me. It was like that kind of that mindset to shut my mouth and let's figure this thing out, you know. Because it is hard sometimes as a leader, because you walk into the room and you're like, we got to solve this problem, and I already know what the answer is, but I need them to come to this answer too, right? And so it's hard, I think, sometimes to shut your brain off and just ask the questions to get to what is the true problem here, because otherwise you lead yourself in down this path of, maybe they get 90% of the way, but over time you're like looking at they're only able to get to 90% of the way. And I always thought about that as looking at it as did I solve the right problem? Right. So going back to internalizing it a little bit, did we actually solve the right problem, or is there another approach or another problem that is here that we didn't see or solve, that maybe is equating to that last 10%? And so, that's another piece of it. And sometimes it's hard I think that's also a hard pill to swallow, to go, well, they're just not performing. The easy answer is, well, if they might just not be a right fit for the organization. But the hard answer is, well, maybe I didn't help them solve the right problem.
That's absolutely true. And that's a very insightful way of looking at it. Problems are rarely one thing, right? They're rarely that easy to solve. There's multiple factors. And we often assume mistakenly that it's mostly an employee issue, most or all. But it may be a combination of employee, leader, and environment as well. What are the environmental barriers that we can help remove? And again, as a leader, it might be you get that 90% of the way there. So let's revisit and talk about what different problem now we need to solve to get that next 10%. And so you're absolutely correct there. I think that's a very good way of looking at this, is making sure that you're solving the right problem or problems. And you may have to go back to the well a couple of times. When you do that, though, and that's what takes real talent in leadership, you have a very loyal employee because you helped manage them up rather than out. It takes much less talent as a leader to manage out. And everyone else in your team is watching what you're doing. They're watching to see if you're treating the underperformer with fairness, if you are trying to provide resources in a good faith effort to help them before you decide that it may not be a fit in the team, because that's a signal to them of how they'll be treated if they run into a similar problem.
Well, the funny thing I've also realized over the years with that is that the team always seems to know who that low performer is, regardless of how discreet you are about it. And they always seem to know whether they're improving or not, because that they're in the trenches with them doing the work. So so if they're starting to show improvement and you've taken the right steps, the team notices that too as well. And I think that bodes well for confidence across the whole team. So it's an interesting dynamic. And I think oftentimes as a young leader, when I first got into leadership, I forgot how much the team really notices what's going on around them.
The team does notice. And this is why it's important to address performance, including underperformance. When good performers see others that are underperforming or aren't behaving, and it's not addressed, remember that you've now set the bar lower, and they now feel like it might be okay not to try as hard or to behave as well. And if you're a good performer, you might have to be making up for the poor performance of your colleague, right? You might have to work that much harder, and that doesn't feel particularly fair or good if you're a good performer. And if we don't see our leaders addressing underperformance, all of a sudden our overperformance isn't rewarded, whether it's financially or otherwise through recognition. We see our actual performance gap like this, but we see the leader treating it like this. And it doesn't feel very good if you're a good performer. And so eventually you leave. And what you're left with as a leader is the low performers who are hanging on to their job. And that is a fundamental issue. And it was an issue I had to address in one organization, where the problem ultimately was the senior leader who wasn't holding others accountable. And that's where we started in making a change in personnel. So we have to remember that everything we do as a leader sends a signal. And if you want to keep good performers, you make sure you recognize that, and there isn't a disproportionate amount of burden they have to take on because other people are underperforming and it's not being addressed.
Yep, absolutely. I love that. You've dropped so many just absolutely amazing nuggets today on the show. We are getting towards the end of time, and I always like to wrap up the show with a final thought, something that our listeners can take away and apply to their business tomorrow. So I leave the floor to you for your final thought.
Yeah, that's probably a hard one. I think leadership, it's easy in theory, but very complex in practice. But I really focus a lot on motivation. Early in the book that I wrote, I talked about leadership character and how important that is, and it certainly is. But we have to remember motivation's relationship to accountability, performance, engagement, and retention. And so as a leader, we really need to understand what our people are motivated by and be able to adapt and cater to that. And remember not to overuse external motivators. Things like money, bonuses, the pizza party, whatever it may be, those are external motivators that any company down the road can duplicate. But as a leader, when you really get to know what people's internal motivators are, these are things like recognition, appreciation, reward, challenge, progress, achievement, inclusion, learning and development. There are these types of motivators that you can tap into again and again as a leader and relate them to doing the job well, right? If you perform the job well, here are the things that could come to you. And often what people are motivated by is also the things that you can reward them with. If people are motivated by learning and development opportunities, we can let them know that performing well might lead to other opportunities for them to get involved in projects, take on more responsibility, learn more, just as an example. So all of the things that surround performance management, learning and development, and so forth, all come back to your ability to motivate people to want to be in your team and want to do a good job. And this is about, again, people feeling some sense of purpose, meaning, and significance. So I focus there, and I focus on leadership character early because they lay a foundation for everything else you're going to do, absolutely including performance management.
Absolutely. I love that. Motivation is a huge part of successful teams. I hear this time and time again. I read it time and time again. And every time I get down to those core motivators with teams, it always proves true. So it must be true. Gosh darn it. So where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, a couple of different places. There is a website called willschirmerofficial.com, and that contains some information about the books and some of my other work, consulting and training. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. Just type in Will Schirmer. I'll be right there on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook as Will Schirmer Official. I'm on Instagram as well, Will Schirmer 1. And Will Schirmer Official on Instagram, and Will Schirmer 1 on Twitter. So there's a few different places I'm on social media. And of course, the books are available in most retailers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we get all those links out there so everybody can go jump on and follow you. I really appreciate everything you brought to the table. This is a topic I could probably talk for hours upon hours on even further. I absolutely love it. But don't forget to swing by thewinningtactics.com so you can subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss all the amazing shows and amazing guests that we get a chance to talk to. Find us on social, find us on YouTube or all the major podcast networks. We thank everybody who joined us on the live stream. And if you're catching the replay, We appreciate you catching the replay. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next Tuesday.
Well, that wraps up yet another episode of the Winning Tactics Podcast. You can find Adam on both the LinkedIn and Facebook platforms. And to support the show and ensure the success of the podcast, would you kindly consider visiting Patreon.com/Adam Sinkus? We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, from the Winning Tactics Podcast, remember, culture is how your team behaves when no one is looking. Take good care, and thanks for listening.